So, if you want to render a single final frame of a modern blockbuster movie, right?
Right.
Let's say a massive sci-fi cityscape with lasers and explosions and all that.
Yeah, the really heavy visual effects.
Exactly. That single image can take a warehouse full of rack-mounted servers, roughly 12 to 20 hours just to calculate the math,
That's for one frame.
just for one frame. We are talking petabytes of data, industrial air conditioning systems roaring, and, an electric bill that would basically bankrupt a small town.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive, massive physical infrastructure.
But what if I told you that one of the most agile, globally reaching animation studios in 2026 wasn't a warehouse at all?
Okay.
What if it's just one guy, one laptop, and a cheap cooling fan buzzing away in a small, dark room tucked into the sprawling expanse of Delhi?
That is just, I mean, it's a phenomenal juxtaposition.
Right. Today, for this deep dive, we are figuring out how the math on that actually works. Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, and sitting across from me is our expert, ready to break all this down.
Hey there. I am really excited for this one because, we are so deeply conditioned to picture high-end visual effects and computer-generated imagery as the exclusive domain of these massive corporate ecosystems.
Totally.
Like, we picture hundreds of specialists buzzing around a multi-level open-plan office in California or London.
Exactly. But today, we're taking a massive deep dive into the architecture of a completely different kind of beast. We're unpacking the journey, the meticulous technical craft, and the sheer digital DNA of Loop Animation Studios.
And its founder, Ankit Saun.
Yes, Ankit Saun. We're looking at the evolution of this single-person freelance experiment that over the course of about 15 years basically mutated into a highly respected 3D animation, VFX, and CGI powerhouse.
And it's a fascinating evolution to trace, precisely because it essentially torches the standard industry playbook.
It really does. And I want to say this directly to you listening. If you have ever felt entirely suffocated by this modern entrepreneurial pressure to constantly, go big, scale up, hire a massive team, or get out of the game.
Which is everywhere these days.
It is. If you feel that pressure, this deep dive is going to change your brain chemistry. Because what Ankit built is essentially a masterclass in how staying small, obsessing over the micro details of your craft, and actually weaponizing your limitations can become your ultimate structural advantage.
I love that phrasing, weaponizing your limitations.
So let's unpack this. How does a one-person setup manage to compute, let alone compete, in an industry defined by sprawling teams and eye-watering budgets?
Well, it's the core tension of his entire career, really. And the answer requires a radical redefinition of what a studio actually is.
Right.
We have to completely strip away the real estate, the bureaucracy, the middle management, the massive payrolls, get down to the absolute mathematical essence of digital creation.
Come to the pixels.
Exactly. But to really grasp how Ankit bypassed the corporate machine, we can't start at his success in 2026. We have to look at the absolute ground zero of his technical knowledge.
Yeah, we have to rewind the clock way back to the early 2000s, specifically landing in 2009.
A completely different world.
It really was. We need to set the scene here because 2009 was a completely different geological era for digital artists. The phrases home studio and remote rendering were, well, they just weren't everyday phrases.
Not at all. Cloud computing was barely a glimmer for the average consumer.
Right. Broadband speeds were abysmal. I remember waiting 10 minutes just to load an image.
Yeah, the barrier to entry was essentially a fortress wall. High-end 3D software cost thousands of dollars, and the hardware required to run it without crashing every 10 minutes. That was entirely out of reach for a normal student.
Which makes his starting point almost absurd. In 2009, Ankit was a BCA, a Bachelor of Computer Applications, third-year dropout.
A dropout, right.
He had zero formal training in advanced 3D software. He didn't have a beast of a workstation. He had no mentors, no industry connections.
Nothing.
Nothing. All he had was a stubborn, almost obsessive fascination with the idea of creating physical worlds on a two-dimensional screen. He dropped out because he was more intrigued by the pixels than by following a traditional academic syllabus.
And the sheer grind of that initial self-teaching phase is really hard to overstate.
I can't even imagine.
Because he wasn't sitting in a university lab with an instructor guiding him through the software interface. He taught himself frame by frame, tool by tool.
Yeah.
He had to master 3D modeling, texturing, lighting, animation, all of it entirely through trial, error, and scraping the very bottom of early internet forums and these really disjointed video tutorials.
Just sitting in that dark room.
Yep.
Staring at a glowing monitor at 3 a.m., trying to figure out why a digital shadow looks jagged, or why a texture looks like cheap plastic instead of human skin.
And tweaking a single setting, waiting 10 minutes for it to render,
Oh man, the feeling.
realizing it looks terrible and having to start completely over.
It's brutal. But you know, what's interesting is that this dropout, self-taught route, which society constantly frames as a failure or a massive setback, right?
Yeah, totally.
That was actually the structural foundation of his entire future advantage.
It's so true. Think about the traditional pipeline in a massive corporate studio.
Okay, let's look at that.
A young animator gets hired and immediately slotted into a highly specialized, isolated role. You become the lighting guy, or you become a rigging specialist.
Rigging meaning putting the digital bones in the characters.
Exactly. You build the invisible digital skeletons inside the 3D models so they can move. But that's all you do. You only ever see your tiny fraction of the assembly line.
Right.
But because Ankit was entirely on his own, he was violently forced to understand the complete CGI pipeline. From sculpting the very first 3D polygon to the final compositing of the moving image, he had to master every single discipline.
It makes me think of an analogy. Like in a traditional corporate studio, you play the oboe.
Okay, I like this.
You sit in your chair, you get your sheet music, and you play your notes. You don't need to know what the cellos are doing, and you definitely don't need to know how to tune a timpani drum.
Right, you just play the oboe.
But Ankit, he had to write the sheet music, conduct the tempo, play every single instrument, and then mix the final audio track. And if the percussion is slightly offbeat, he can't turn around and complain to the drummer.
Because he is the drummer.
He is the drummer.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it, because that holistic one-man orchestra understanding is exactly what allows for extreme efficiency later on.
How so?
Well, when you compose the music, you don't write an oboe part that clashes with the cello, because you are playing both. In CGI terms, Ankit doesn't build a 3D model that is overly complicated and impossible to light, because he knows he's the guy who has to light it tomorrow.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Right. By the time Loop Animation Studios was officially founded in January 2017, this foundational philosophy was baked into his muscle memory. Start small, stay independent, care more about the entirety of the craft than the size of the team.
But wait, we have to talk about the gap between 2009 and 2017.
Yes, we do.
Because that is not a smooth 8-year montage of just getting better at software. There is a massive, highly personal roadblock in this timeline.
A huge one.
In 2013, everything grinds to a devastating halt. Ankit is diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The screen essentially goes dark.
Yeah.
He steps away from the industry, from the software, from everything, really, just to survive and figure out his mental health.
It's a profound disruption.
Uh,
And it completely reframes the narrative. This isn't just a story of a guy who learned a software program. It's a story of psychological survival.
exactly.
Because bipolar disorder is characterized by extreme emotional peaks and valleys, mania and depression. When your entire career relies on self-motivation, sitting alone in a dark room facing really complex technical problems.
A severe depressive episode makes that literally impossible.
Exactly. You just can't do it.
How does someone even begin to come back from that, especially in a field that moves so fast? Like if you step away from tech for 4 years, you're practically a dinosaur when you return.
You really are. The software updates, the render engines change entirely, the industry standards shift. But what's incredible about his comeback leading up to 2017 is how the very nature of CGI might have actually aided his return.
Wait, really? How so?
Think about it. 3D software is an environment of absolute control. The real world is chaotic, unpredictable, and emotionally volatile. But inside a software program like Maya or Blender, math is math.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. If you place a light source at a specific coordinate, it will cast a shadow at a precise, predictable angle every single time.
It's dependable.
Extremely dependable. Re-engaging with that interface piece by piece allowed him to build a structured, controllable microcosm. His meticulous control over the software provided this incredible grounding mechanism.
Wow, so the creation of Loop Animation Studios in 2017 wasn't just a business launch.
Yeah.
It was a declaration of recovery. It was him saying, I have stabilized, I have mastered my tools, and I am ready to translate this private obsession into a public entity.
Beautifully put. And that journey through severe mental health struggles deeply informed the studio's DNA. It stripped away any desire for hollow corporate prestige.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to impress anyone.
Exactly. He wasn't building a studio to feed an ego. He was building an environment where he could sustainably exist and create art on his own terms.
Which naturally brings us to the actual mechanics of that business model. Because there's a massive chasm between a passionate guy surviving in a room and a functioning global business.
A huge gap.
Right. Today, Loop Animation Studios operates out of Hashsal, New Delhi. And they describe themselves as a world-class freelance animation service provider.
Mm.
But they wear an absurd number of hats. They function as a 3D animation studio, a VFX workshop, a modeling house, and a digital storytelling lab.
That is a massive scope of services for any studio, let alone one person.
Right. And Ankit managed absolutely everything for years. I mean, initial client pitching, budget negotiation, the actual 3D modeling, texturing, animating, rendering, and final delivery. All of it.
Which is exhausting just to list out.
It is. And I really have to push back hard on this concept here because, sure, agility is great, low overhead is great, but agility doesn't render pixels faster.
No, it doesn't.
If a client in the UK wants a 3-minute 4K animated video delivered in 2 weeks, a 50-person studio can parallel process that. They put 10 animators on it simultaneously. A solo guy literally cannot physically compute that.
Right.
So how does he actually solve the brutal math problem of time and processing power?
That is the exact right question to ask because you cannot outwill physics. The ceiling of human time and hardware capacity is a hard wall.
So what does he do?
He doesn't try to break the wall. He navigates around it through extreme pipeline optimization.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that actually mean in practice?
Let's take rendering, which is the calculation of light we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
A junior artist might put 10 highly detailed digital lights in a scene, causing the computer to calculate millions of unnecessary light bounces. That brings the machine to an absolute crawl. But Ankit, because he has that holistic knowledge, knows how to bake textures.
Wait, baking textures, like an oven?
Essentially, yes.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that.
So instead of having the computer calculate the light in real time for every single frame of a 30-second animation, he calculates the light once. Then he paints that shadow permanently onto the 3D model's texture file.
Oh, wow.
Right, he bakes it in. And then he just turns the digital lights off.
Wait, really? He just turns them off?
Yeah. The scene now renders in seconds instead of hours, but to the viewer, it looks exactly the same.
That is genius.
He solves the time problem by outsmarting the software, not just throwing more computers at it.
So it's a direct line from brain to screen, but optimized at a microscopic level.
And beyond the technical hacks, think about the time saved by bypassing bureaucratic bottlenecks.
Oh, yeah. The corporate red tape.
Exactly.
Wow.
In a huge agency, a client has an idea. They tell an account manager. The account manager writes a brief for a creative director. The director tells a lead animator who assigns it to a junior animator.
It's like a massive game of telephone.
By the time a single pixel is rendered on screen, the original vision has passed through 5 different human filters. And a week of meetings has been wasted.
Just completely lost in translation.
But Loop bypasses all of that. The person hearing the client's emotion on the Zoom call is the exact same person manipulating the light in the software 5 minutes later. The iteration loop is instantaneous.
So the lack of size isn't a limitation. It's a hyper-efficient communication feature.
Precisely.
But still, if the structure is just one person and a laptop, the output, the actual pixels on the screen, has to be visually undeniable to compete globally.
Oh, definitely.
Nobody hires a one-man studio out of charity. They hire you because the work makes their jaw drop.
And this is where the raw technical skill has to meet a very specific, deeply human creative vision.
Yeah. On their YouTube bio, Loop has this 7-word manifesto that perfectly encapsulates this. It says, Loop Animation Studios is all about art and computer-generated imagery.
Art and CGI.
It sounds incredibly simple, almost overly basic, but those words are deliberately chosen to separate them from the rest of the industry.
They really are. Ankit operates on the philosophy that creativity is fundamentally an emotion, not just a technical display of software proficiency.
But how do you actually inject emotion into math? Because at its core, like we said, CGI is just vectors, geometry, and algorithms.
You do it through the universal languages of cinema.
Okay, explain that.
Look at a standard corporate 3D demo reel. It usually shows a perfectly clean product, maybe a shiny new smartphone spinning in a blank white room. It proves they know how to make a phone.
Right, it's very clinical.
But Loop's work consistently feels like a mini film sequence. Why? Because they utilize cinematic chiaroscuro lighting. Deep, intentional shadows contrasting with bright highlights to create mood.
Ah, like an old painting.
Yes. They utilize meticulous color grading to make a scene feel warm and nostalgic or cold and isolating. They use dynamic camera movement that simulates the imperfections of a real human holding a lens.
Oh, like a slight camera shake.
Exactly. They aren't trying to show you a perfect 3D bottle. They want you to feel a sense of thirst and anticipation when you look at the condensation on that bottle.
They are actively fighting against it, looking computer-made.
Exactly. They have this incredibly rare ability to balance hyperrealism with distinct stylization. They adapt the visual language entirely depending on the emotional core of the client's brief.
And here is where I think Loop actually laps the competition. It's not just about the visuals. If you dig into their workflow, you uncover this deep, almost obsessive sensitivity to sound.
Oh, the audio integration is wild.
It really is. They don't just finish a video and then paste a royalty-free music track over it at the end. The timing, the pacing, the cuts, the movement of the camera, everything is reverse engineered to match the rhythm of the audio track.
Which is an excruciatingly tedious way to work.
It is. To give you a concrete example, in one of their behind-the-scenes videos, Ankit talks about working on 4 reels for each song.
Let that sink in for a second.
I mean, that means he builds 4 completely different visual iterations, rendering them, tweaking the keyframes, perfectly timing the digital camera swoops to the exact millisecond of a snare drum hit or a bass drop, just to find the perfect marriage of sound and motion.
And we have to ask why a solo operator would spend precious hours doing that.
Right, why not just do it once?
Because that obsession with audio integration is exactly what elevates a simple 10-second product animation from a mere disposable commodity into a piece of art.
Yeah.
If you just need a flat architectural render of a new apartment building, you can hire 1,000 different cheap firms online to do it. But if you want a piece of content that makes a viewer stop scrolling, hold their breath, and actually feel something, because the rhythm of the visual perfectly matches the swell of the music, you need an artist who views CGI as an emotional, audiovisual medium.
Wow.
That is Loop's unassailable competitive moat.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. You have this deeply artistic, highly skilled solo creator operating out of a room in Delhi. The work is cinematic. The workflow is optimized to the absolute limit.
Yeah.
But how does the rest of the world actually find him? If you don't have a massive marketing department taking clients out to expensive dinners in Soho, how do you get contracts from across the globe?
The answer is a meticulously crafted digital ecosystem. His digital footprint is where the one-man studio magically achieves the scale of a massive corporation.
Yeah, if you spend an hour falling down the rabbit hole of the Loop Animation Studio's YouTube channel, you start to see a very deliberate, genius pattern emerge.
It's not just random portfolio plugs.
No, not at all. The content is split into 3 highly strategic buckets. First, you have the show reels. These are the heavy hitters. You have the show reel 2024, which is this massive chest-thumping compilation of his best work. And then you have tighter updates, like the Summer Recap 2025, showing off his absolute latest workflows.
That's the proof of competence.
Yeah.
It tells the client, I can execute at the highest level.
Exactly. The second bucket is educational content. He uploads deep dive breakdowns and software time lapses. He is actively showing aspiring teenage animators how to achieve Hollywood-level results using limited hardware.
Giving back to the community.
Right. But the third bucket, and this is where I think the real magic happens, is deeply personal storytelling.
You're referring to the 15-year film.
Yes. The 15-year film is a masterpiece of modern branding. It's not a slick corporate portfolio of flawless renders. It is a raw narrative self-portrait.
It really is vulnerable.
He sits there and candidly discusses the brutal setbacks. He talks about the isolation, the 4 a.m. nights where the software crashes and destroys a week of work. He talks about the crushing weight of self-doubt. And he balances that with the small, quiet, profound joys of finally finishing a project that you are proud of.
And let's analyze the strategy behind that vulnerability. In the modern creator economy, vulnerability is an incredibly potent business tool. By openly sharing the struggles, Ankit turns a faceless corporate entity into a highly relatable human character. When a client or a director hires him, they don't feel like they're just signing a contract with a vendor.
Right. They feel invested.
Exactly. They feel like they are actively partnering with a resilient, passionate artist whose story they are already invested in. It builds a bedrock of trust that no amount of traditional marketing budget could ever buy.
And it all ties back to the actual name of the studio, Loop. What does that word actually signify in the architecture of his career?
The metaphor of the loop is brilliant because it operates on 2 levels.
Okay.
In the literal mechanics of animation, a loop implies continuity, like a walk cycle where the character takes 2 steps and the animation repeats seamlessly forever.
Right, like a GIF.
Exactly. But philosophically, a loop is a cycle of evolution. It's the rhythm between experimentation and refinement. You try a new technique, you fail, you learn, you loop back, you refine it, and you push it further on the next cycle.
And he doesn't just keep that philosophy in his head, he turns it into a literal revenue-generating business strategy on the platform Gumroad.
Yes, the Gumroad strategy.
For those who don't know, Gumroad is a platform where creators can sell digital products. Ankit takes the 3D models, the textures, and the lighting setups he builds for his client projects, refines them, and sells them as asset packs to other animators.
Which is fascinating.
But I have to stop and ask, why on earth would he do that? Isn't he essentially giving away the secret recipe to his competitors? Why hand other hungry freelance animators the exact tools you spent hundreds of hours building?
It feels completely counterintuitive if you are operating from an old-school corporate scarcity mindset.
Right.
In the old days, studios locked their digital assets in proprietary vaults. But Ankit understands the new mechanics of the creator economy. He realizes that in this space, your byproducts are actually your products.
Okay, wait, what do you mean by that?
The digital sawdust covering the floor of his studio is highly valuable material for someone else.
The digital sawdust. I love that.
Exactly. And the secret recipe isn't the 3D model of a futuristic chair. The secret recipe is Ankit's specific emotional application of lighting and camera movement to that chair.
Ah, so giving them the chair doesn't mean they can make it look like his.
Precisely. By turning his own creative loops into reusable tools for others, he accomplishes 2 massive structural wins. First, he creates a passive, dual revenue stream. In the freelance world, you have terrifying financial valleys between big client jobs. Selling assets smooths out that income curve.
That makes total sense.
Second, and more importantly, he cements his industry identity. He's no longer just an isolated artist creating original work. He's an enabler. He becomes a foundational layer in thousands of other creators' workflows.
He becomes the infrastructure. He's the guy selling the pickaxes to everyone else trying to strike gold. And people are incredibly loyal to the person who gave them their best tools. So you take that YouTube presence, you combine it with the Gumroad asset sharing, and it directly translates into a truly borderless client base. It proves that geography is entirely irrelevant if your digital footprint is strong enough.
The global portfolio completely validates the model. Let's look at the range of projects he's securing from that single desk in Delhi. He's pulling in clients spanning from local Indian independent filmmakers to massive, fast-moving tech startups in the UK.
Yeah, let's break down 2 specific case studies that really highlight the ridiculous range of his capabilities.
Good idea.
First, let's look at the Ramayan project. Loop was hired to create a launch video and promotional material for a high-end children's book based on deep Indian mythology.
That brief requires an incredibly specific, narrative-driven approach. You can't just throw standard lighting on it. It requires cultural sensitivity, warmth, and likely a highly stylized, painterly 3D aesthetic to match the feeling of reading a mythic storybook.
Right, it's pure emotional storytelling. But then you contrast that with the second case study, a Chennai-based augmented reality startup.
A totally different beast.
Completely. They hired Loop to develop stylized 3D Hindi and English fonts, complete with special characters and complex textures, specifically for an AR platform. That is a brutal pivot. You are moving from warm storytelling into highly technical, precision-driven software integration.
It is a totally different language. Think about the physics of AR. Like we said earlier, a movie can take 10 hours to render 1 frame of a 3D object. But in augmented reality, when a user holds up their phone to see a 3D font floating in their living room, the phone's processor has to calculate the lighting and the shadows on that font 60 times every single second.
Oh my God.
And it has to do that while constantly adjusting for the shifting angle of the phone camera. It is a mathematical nightmare.
So the 3D models have to be incredibly lightweight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are dealing with strict polygon count limits, complex UI and UX integration rules, and baked textures. If Ankit didn't intimately understand the deep underlying math of the CGI pipeline, if he only knew how to make things look pretty, he would completely fail at the AR job.
Because it would just crash the phone.
Exactly. But because he built his knowledge from the ground up, he can seamlessly transition from the hyper-artistic Ramayan project to the hyper-technical Chennai AR project without breaking a sweat.
It is the ultimate flex of the one-man orchestra, but carrying that entire physical and emotional load alone inevitably forces a breaking point.
It has to.
Right. We cannot sit here and romanticize the solo creator journey as some kind of utopian ideal, because when you look closely at his story, especially as he pushes 15 years deep into this grind, you start to see the severe fractures in the solo at all costs mindset.
It is a pressure cooker. The independent studio model is a massive double-edged sword, and the blade swinging back at you is incredibly sharp.
Let's break down the reality of this dilemma. The desperate desire for growth versus the fierce protective need to maintain your independence.
Okay.
The pros are obvious, right? Total creative control. You don't have to water down your vision to satisfy a corporate committee. You have the ultimate luxury of choosing genuinely interesting projects. If a brief comes in and it feels soulless, you can just say no because you don't have to feed the beast of a massive monthly payroll.
The freedom is intoxicating,
Yeah.
but the cons are physically and psychologically devastating.
Yeah.
The hard capacity limit we discussed earlier means that when demand spikes, when you release a viral video and 10 massive clients want to hire you tomorrow, you cannot clone yourself.
You just can't do the work.
Right. You have to turn away lucrative, career-changing work, which is agonizing.
Hmm.
Furthermore, there's the exhausting reality of context switching.
I'm going to text switch.
Yes. The human brain is terrible at multitasking. But a solo operator has to wake up and be the visionary artist for 3 hours, then switch gears and become a ruthless budget negotiator, then become the IT support guy fixing a crashed hard drive, and then become the charming marketing director on social media.
Oh, man, that sounds exhausting.
It is. And hovering over all of that is the suffocating psychological pressure. You are the sole decision maker on every single frame. If a project fails, there is no junior artist to blame. If a client is angry, the email lands directly in your personal inbox.
You bear the entire brunt of it.
It's a heavy burden to carry year after year. And when you factor in his history, having already survived a major bipolar episode that derailed his career in 2013, the imperative to manage stress and avoid burning out isn't just about business efficiency. It is literally about mental survival.
Which is precisely why his transparency is so crucial. Loop doesn't hide the burnout. He doesn't project this toxic hustle culture illusion of a seamless, stress-free paradise.
No, not at all.
He openly discusses the creative paralysis. And counterintuitively, this honesty fosters an incredibly fiercely loyal community.
It totally does. When aspiring animators in small towns around the world watch Loop's content, they aren't alienated by an unattainable, perfect influencer life.
Right.
They see a direct reflection of their own struggles happening in their own bedrooms. It frames the struggle not as a sign that they are failing, but as a mandatory, unavoidable part of the creative process.
Which brings us to the fascinating precipice of 2026. He has survived the grind, built the global portfolio, cultivated the massive online ecosystem, and stabilized his workflow. So after 15 plus years of fiercely protecting his independence, where does a studio like this go next?
It's the ultimate crossroads. He has arrived at the destination he originally mapped out.
So based on where the studio is currently positioned, what are the natural evolutionary steps?
The trajectory points in 3 very distinct directions. First, he is finally looking at potentially expanding the team to handle the massive influx of demand. Second, diving much deeper into original narrative work, like directing his own short films or microseries. Moving beyond just servicing client briefs and becoming an original IP creator. And third, significantly expanding his educational footprint with highly structured premium courses.
Okay, I have to stop you on that first point. Expanding the team.
Yeah.
This feels like a trap. If Ankit decides to hire 5 animators to handle the workflow, does he instantly kill the golden goose? Doesn't he risk losing that hyper-personal, meticulous Loop identity? Does the bureaucracy inevitably creep back in?
It's the tightrope walk that destroys most successful indie creators. If you scale too fast and hire a massive payroll, you become the exact bloated corporate entity you rebelled against.
Exactly.
But if you don't scale at all, your physical biology will eventually break down. However, in 2026, he has a completely new variable to play with that didn't exist in 2009.
AI.
Exactly. The incorporation of artificial intelligence into the CGI workspace fundamentally rewrites the rules of scaling.
Break this down for me. How does AI actually solve the scaling problem without diluting his art? Because the fear is that AI just generates generic sludge.
The fear of AI replacing the artist misses how high-end professionals actually use it. Ankit isn't typing, "Make me a cool 3D video" into a prompt box.
Right. He's not doing the simple generation stuff.
No, he is using AI to eliminate the brutal, time-consuming grunt work of the pipeline. For example, retopology.
What's that?
It's the incredibly tedious process of optimizing the geometry of a 3D model so it animates cleanly. It used to take days of manual clicking. Now, AI-assisted tools can do it in minutes.
Wow, days down to minutes.
Yeah, and AI denoising algorithms allow him to render an image at a lower quality and then have the AI perfectly smooth out the digital grain. That cuts render times by 80%.
So the AI acts as the junior assistants he never wanted to hire.
Precisely. AI allows the solo creator to scale their compute power and their manual labor exponentially without adding a single human to the payroll. It protects the indie spirit while delivering corporate-level volume.
That is incredible.
And if he does bring in human collaborators, the model shifts from a vertical hierarchy to a horizontal network. He doesn't hire full-time employees. He collaborates with other elite, specialized solo freelancers, forming an agile strike team that assembles for a massive project and immediately disbands when it's over.
Wow. So the circumference of the loop expands, but the core remains entirely hollow, flexible, and fully under his control.
Yes.
It is an incredibly elegant solution to the oldest business problem in the world. And regardless of exactly how he structures the next 5 years, the cultural impact of what he has already built is undeniable.
Completely undeniable.
As we look at Loop Animation Studios in 2026, the legacy is secure. For millions of students, hobbyists, and dreamers who feel locked out of the traditional systems, Ankit Saun's journey provides a concrete, executable blueprint. He proves that you do not need a piece of paper from an elite university.
No.
You do not need a massive venture capital firm backing you to create cinematic, emotionally resonant art.
He completely decentralizes the power structure of the industry. He removes the gatekeepers.
So, if we have to distill the absolute essence of this massive deep dive into a single thought, it's this. Loop Animation Studios is the ultimate triumph of a small studio mindset applied to global-scale ambition, fueled by a deeply emotional reverence for the art of computer-generated imagery. Ankit proved that the sheer size of your rendering farm does not dictate the impact of your art. The human intention behind your pixels does.
That's spot on.
Ah.
And as we close out today, I want to pivot this entire conversation directly back to the listener.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because there is a massive shift happening in the global creative economy right now. We all have a tendency to wait for the perfect, frictionless conditions before we start. We convince ourselves that we need the right budget, the perfect team, the elite credentials, or the most expensive software before we can make our mark.
We always wait for tomorrow.
Always. But if an untrained dropout, navigating severe mental health crises, sitting with a basic laptop in a sweltering room in Delhi, can slowly build a globally recognized studio by simply refusing to stop learning, what loop in your own life are you neglecting?
That is the question.
Look at the structural advantages you think you're missing. What if your biggest perceived limitation, your lack of funding, your isolation, your lack of a formal team, is actually the exact constraint you need to force you to learn the entire pipeline of your industry? What if the digital sawdust you are sweeping away right now is the foundation of your future empire?
Let that sit in your mind tonight. The next time you feel overwhelmed by the pressure to be bigger or paralyzed by the feeling that you don't have enough resources to even start, picture that small, quiet room in Delhi. The fan humming, the screen glowing in the dark, the persistent, hypnotic click of the mouse. The tools have never been more accessible, and the gatekeepers are gone. The loop is just waiting for you to begin.